Between 1941 and 1945, at the Jasenovac concentration camp, Ustaše guards killed tens of thousands of people using knives, clubs, and improvised tools. The Nazi officials themselves who visited this place described it as being beyond their imagination. Here, there were no gas chambers nor German supervision, only an indigenous system of terror where murder became competition. The Ustašes of the Independent State of Croatia designed special knives called Srbosjek to kill faster, transformed factory ovens into crematoriums, and organized killing contests where guards competed to see who could murder more victims in a single night. The victims were mainly Serbs, Jews, Romani, and political opponents who died face to face with their executioners while the Sava River washed away their corpses. How could a regime surpass its own Nazi mentors in cruelty? What turned ordinary people into such efficient killing machines? Why does this place remain an object of denial and political manipulation decades later? On April 10, 1941, while German troops paraded triumphantly through the streets of Zagreb, the independent state of Croatia was officially born. This new territory, known as NDH by its Croatian initials, spanned an area of 102,000 square kilometers that included not only Croatia, but also Bosnia and Herzegovina. Its leader, Ante Pavelić, returned from exile after years of planning alongside the Axis powers to create what he called the first truly independent Croatian state in 800 years. However, the independence was purely nominal. The NDH functioned as a puppet state under German and Italian supervision, divided into zones of influence reflecting the geopolitical interests of its sponsors. The Germans controlled the North and East Zone, rich in industrial and agricultural resources, while the Italians administered the Adriatic coast with its strategic ports. This territorial division already anticipated the tensions that would mark the brief but bloody existence of the Ustaše regime. Pavelić and his Ustaše movement had developed during the 30s an extreme nationalist ideology that combined Croatian ultranationalism with elements of European fascism. The Ustaše considered that the Serbian population, which constituted approximately 30% of the NDH territory, represented the main obstacle to the creation of an ethnically pure Croatian state. The Jews, although numerically less significant with approximately 40,000 people, were immediately identified as enemies of the new order. The Romani, scattered in rural communities, completed the list of populations marked for elimination. The legal transformation of the territory began with a speed that surprised even the German observers. On April 17th, barely a week after the proclamation of the state, the regime enacted the first decree on the protection of the Aryan blood and honor of the Croatian people. This legislation, inspired directly by the Nuremberg racial laws, defined who could be considered a Croatian citizen and who remained excluded from the national community. Subsequent decrees systematically built the legal framework of extermination. On April 30th, the ban on the Cyrillic alphabet was established, traditionally used by the Orthodox Serbian population, while all non-Croatian citizens were forced to wear identification badges. Serbs had to wear a blue band with the letter P for pravoslavni, which means Orthodox. Jews were forced to wear the yellow star, following the German model, while the Romani wore a black band with the letter Z for Ziguner. Mass deportation began immediately after the implementation of these measures. The Ustaše authorities established a system of concentration camps that extended across the entire NDH territory. Initially, these camps functioned as temporary internment centers to facilitate deportations toward German territory. However, the logistics of transporting tens of thousands of prisoners toward German camps soon proved to be impracticable, especially when German war needs began to limit the availability of rail transport. The Ustaše solution was characteristic of the regime's mentality. If they could not deport the undesirable populations, they would eliminate them directly in Croatian territory. This decision transformed the nature of the NDH concentration camps from temporary internment centers into permanent extermination facilities. The German commander Edmund Glaise von Horstenau, sent as a German military representative to the NDH, began to report to Berlin about the methods employed by his Croatian allies. His dispatches, initially optimistic about collaboration with the Ustaše regime, acquired a tone of increasing concern. The Germans had expected to find in Croatia a disciplined and efficient ally, similar to other European collaborationist states. Instead, they found a regime that turned systematic murder into public spectacle. The Ustaše authorities established a network of camps that included facilities in Danica, Kruščica, Lobograd, and Jadovno. Each of these camps developed its own extermination specialties, but it was Jasenovac that emerged as the nerve center of the NDH system of mass murders. Its strategic location at the confluence of the Una and Sava rivers, along with its direct rail connection to Zagreb, made it the ideal place to process the largest number of victims. The construction of Jasenovac began in August of 1941, barely 4 months after the proclamation of the NDH. The Ustaše authorities requisitioned an abandoned brick factory on the outskirts of the town of Jasenovac, approximately 100 kilometers southeast of Zagreb. The choice of the site was not accidental. The factory had ovens that could be adapted for the cremation of bodies, while its proximity to the Sava River facilitated the disposal of evidence. The first transports of prisoners arrived at Jasenovac on August 29, 1941. Initially, the camp housed mainly Serbian intellectuals, Orthodox priests, and Jewish community leaders. The Ustaše regime had identified these figures as the most dangerous elements for the stability of the new state, capable of organizing resistance against the policies of forced Croatization. However, the deportations soon extended to entire populations. Whole Serbian villages were surrounded by Ustaše units, their inhabitants loaded into cattle trains and transported directly to Jasenovac. Children were no exception to this policy of total extermination. The regime even established a specific camp for minors in Sisak, known as the Kindergarten of Death, where thousands of Serbian, Jewish, and Romani children were killed through methods that included lethal injections and deliberate starvation. The brutality of the Ustaše system began to generate concern even among its German supervisors. The reports of Glaise von Horstenau described murder methods that he considered unnecessarily cruel and inefficient. The Germans had developed their own industrialized methods of extermination, focused on efficiency and the concealment of evidence. The Ustaše, on the contrary, seemed to enjoy the theatricality of the violence, turning executions into public spectacles that generated terror but also resistance. The implementation of the Ustaše racial laws was particularly severe in the rural areas of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where Serbian, Croatian, and Muslim communities had coexisted for centuries. The Ustaše introduced the concept of ethnic cleansing as official state policy, using this term decades before it became popular during the Yugoslav wars of the 90s. Their goal was not simply to eliminate undesirable populations, but to erase all evidence of their historical existence in the NDH territory. This policy of total elimination included the systematic destruction of Orthodox churches, synagogues, cemeteries, and cultural monuments. The Ustaše understood that physical genocide had to be complemented with a cultural genocide that would eliminate the historical memory of the eliminated populations. This combination of physical and cultural extermination made the Ustaše regime one of the most comprehensive in its genocidal goals. The legal machinery of extermination functioned with a bureaucratic efficiency that contrasted dramatically with the brutality of its implementation. The Ustaše decrees established detailed procedures for the confiscation of properties, the dissolution of mixed marriages, and the reclassification of citizens according to racial criteria. This legalization of genocide provided the perpetrators with an administrative justification for their actions, while creating the illusion that mass extermination was simply the routine application of state law. The transformation of a modest brick factory into the most efficient extermination complex in the Balkans required meticulous planning that revealed the systematic mentality behind the apparent Ustaše madness. When Vjekoslav Luburić, commander of all NDH concentration camps, first inspected the site in July of 1941, he found an abandoned industrial facility that offered unique advantages for his sinister purposes. The original factory had been built in 1936 by an Austrian company to take advantage of the high-quality clay deposits found on the banks of the Sava River. Its industrial design included 3 high-capacity ovens, ventilation systems, an internal rail network, and spacious warehouses. More importantly, its location in a swampy and sparsely populated area guaranteed the isolation necessary for the activities Luburić had planned. The adaptation of existing facilities began immediately under the supervision of Ustaše architects and engineers. The brick ovens were modified to increase their combustion capacity, while new feeding systems were installed to allow continuous operation. Ustaše engineers consulted discreetly with German specialists on cremation techniques, although they developed their own innovations adapted to the resources available locally. The final Jasenovac complex spanned approximately 240 hectares, divided into multiple specialized sections. Jasenovac I served as an administrative center and barracks for the Ustaše security forces. This facility included offices, archives, dormitories for guards, and an interrogation center equipped with isolation cells. Documents recovered after the war revealed that this section maintained detailed records of arrivals, although significantly not of departures. Jasenovac II functioned as the main extermination camp, built around the modified ovens of the original factory. The barracks for prisoners were deliberately designed to maximize overcrowding and discomfort. Each barracks, originally designed to store 50 tons of bricks, was adapted to house between 300 and 500 prisoners simultaneously. The lack of proper ventilation, sanitary systems, and heating turned these spaces into incubators for diseases that weakened prisoners before their execution. The engineering of extermination in Jasenovac revealed a sophisticated understanding of the psychology of terror. Ustaše architects designed specific routes that prisoners had to follow from their arrival until their elimination. These routes passed deliberately through areas where new prisoners could observe the bodies of previous victims, the torture instruments, and the crematorium ovens. This calculated exposure aimed to break psychological resistance before physical torture began. Jasenovac III, known as Ciglana due to its location in the original brick factory, specialized in the industrial processing of victims. Ustaše engineers developed an assembly line system for murder that rivaled German methods in efficiency, although it used more primitive technology. Prisoners were processed in groups of 25 to 30 people, moving through specific stations where they were stripped of their belongings, had their heads shaved, and were finally executed through methods that varied according to resource availability. The design of the body disposal systems in Jasenovac reflected a practical understanding of the logistical challenges of mass genocide. Ustaše engineers calculated that the modified ovens could process approximately 80 bodies per day, operating at maximum capacity. However, during periods of peak activity, this capacity proved insufficient, leading to the development of alternative disposal methods. The construction of mass common graves required extensive excavations that permanently altered the area's topography. Ustaše engineers used heavy machinery requisitioned from civil construction projects to create graves with capacity for thousands of bodies. These excavations were strategically located in areas with a high water table, calculating that the humidity would accelerate decomposition and reduce forensic evidence. The Sava River became an integral component of the evidence disposal system. Engineers built specific ramps that allowed the efficient transport of bodies from execution areas to the riverbank. During seasonal floods, these ramps remained submerged, facilitating the removal of blood traces and other biological remains. The transport infrastructure of the complex was carefully planned to maximize the efficiency of mass deportations. The existing rail line was extended directly into the camp interior, eliminating the need to transport prisoners by road, where they could be observed by the civilian population. Engineers built specialized platforms with ramps that allowed for the rapid unloading of overloaded cattle trains. The communication systems of the complex included direct telephone lines with Zagreb, Split, and other major NDH cities. This connectivity allowed for the efficient coordination of deportations from multiple locations simultaneously. Recovered records indicate that Ustaše authorities maintained detailed arrival schedules for trains, optimizing the use of extermination facilities. The construction of Jasenovac 4 and 5 significantly expanded the complex's capacity during 1942, when deportations reached their peak. These new sections were specifically designed for the processing of whole families, including separate facilities for women and children. Ustaše architects developed murder methods adapted specifically for young victims, including smaller chambers and techniques that required less physical force. The perimeter security of the complex combined natural obstacles with built fortifications. The surrounding swamps provided a natural barrier against escapes, while minefields and barbed wire completed the encirclement. Strategically located watchtowers provided complete observation of the perimeter and the internal areas of the camp. Specialized workshops within the complex manufactured the specific instruments used for executions. Ustaše blacksmiths developed unique designs for knives, clubs, and other torture instruments, adapting them to maximize pain while minimizing the time required for each execution. This local production of death instruments reflected the artisanal nature of the Ustaše genocide, which contrasted with the industrialized methods employed in German camps. The urban planning of the complex included residential areas for guards and administrators, physically separated from the extermination facilities. These areas included family housing, a school for the children of personnel, and recreational facilities. This normalization of daily life, alongside mass genocide, exemplified the Ustaše regime's capacity to compartmentalize extreme violence. The water supply and waste disposal systems were designed to handle the unique demands of mass extermination. Engineers built deep wells that provided sufficient water for cleaning operations following executions, while specialized drainage systems channeled waste toward the Sava River. This sanitary infrastructure allowed for the maintenance of adequate operational conditions even during periods of intense activity. The distinctive brutality of Jasenovac did not reside solely in the scale of its murders, but in the specific methods developed by its perpetrators to maximize the victim's suffering. While other Nazi extermination camps prioritized industrial efficiency, Jasenovac specialized in techniques that deliberately prolonged agony. turning murder into a ritual of humiliation and terror. The most emblematic instrument of this methodology was the Srbosjek, a specially designed curved knife that became the symbol of the Ustaše genocide. This weapon, whose name literally means Serb-Cutter, was developed specifically for the operational needs of Jasenovac by local blacksmiths under supervision of the camp commanders. Its design revealed a sinister understanding of human anatomy and the psychology of terror. The Srbosjek consisted of a curved blade of approximately 12 centimeters mounted on a leather grip that fastened directly to the user's wrist. This configuration allowed for fast and repetitive cutting movements without excessive fatigue, optimizing the executioner's capacity to process multiple victims in prolonged sessions. The specific curvature of the blade had been calculated to cut the throat with a single movement, causing massive bleeding but avoiding instant death. The blacksmiths of Jasenovac produced hundreds of these instruments in different sizes and configurations. Specific versions existed for different types of victims: larger Srbosjeks for adult men, medium versions for women, and smaller specialized tools for children. This diversification of equipment revealed the level of systematic planning behind the apparently chaotic murders. In addition to the Srbosjek, the perpetrators of Jasenovac developed a variety of specialized instruments adapted to different situations and personal preferences. Modified hammers with metal points were used to fracture skulls in a way that caused slow death by cerebral hemorrhage. Clubs with embedded nails produced multiple wounds that generated prolonged suffering without causing immediate death. The strangulation methods employed in Jasenovac revealed a disturbing technical sophistication. The executioners developed specific techniques using piano wire that allowed for precise control of the asphyxiation duration. This methodology allowed for alternating between moments of strangulation and release, prolonging the agony over periods that could extend for hours. Technical specialization extended even to the methods of pre-execution torture. The perpetrators had developed specific techniques to extract information, although frequently the torture continued long after the victims had revealed everything they knew. Instruments such as heated tongs, long needles, and diluted acids were used to inflict maximum pain without causing premature death. The mass murder methods in Jasenovac adapted artisanal techniques to an industrial scale. During group executions, the victims were organized into rows where each executioner specialized in a specific murder method. This division of labor allowed for the processing of large groups while maintaining the standards of cruelty that characterized the camp. The body disposal techniques revealed an equal level of systematic planning. Improvised crematoriums used specific combinations of fuels that included wood, coal, and human fat to maintain temperatures sufficient for complete cremation. Operators had calculated the exact proportions necessary for different types of bodies, optimizing the process for different ages and physical constitutions. The Sava River became an integral component of the disposal system, but its use required specific techniques developed locally. Bodies were weighted with stones at precise anatomical locations that guaranteed their initial sinking, but calculated to allow decomposition gases to eventually release them downstream, far from the camp. This technique minimized the buildup of evidence in the immediate vicinity of Jasenovac, while dispersing the remains over a wide geographic area. The perpetrators developed specialized methods for different categories of victims that reflected both practical and ideological considerations. Intellectuals and religious leaders frequently received specific treatments designed to symbolically humiliate their social status. Orthodox priests were forced to perform parodies of religious rituals before their execution, while teachers were forced to witness the murder of their students. Jewish victims faced specific protocols that combined Ustaše brutality with elements of traditional European anti-Semitism. Jewish men were frequently forced to dig their own graves before execution, while Jewish women suffered specific humiliations designed to degrade their religious and cultural identity. Romani children, identified as particularly problematic due to their nomadic lifestyle, faced murder methods that the perpetrators justified as prevention of future threats to social order. These executions frequently included ritual elements that reflected local superstitions regarding the Romani population. The methods of documentation and recording of executions revealed the bureaucratic mentality that coexisted with extreme brutality. Commanders maintained detailed records of methods used, time required per execution, and the relative efficiency of different techniques. This information was used to optimize future operations and train new perpetrators. The training of new executioners followed specific protocols developed by veteran commanders. New guards began by observing executions, progressed to assisting in preparations, and finally performed their first executions under supervision. This process of gradual initiation allowed for the identification of individuals with specific aptitudes for different types of murders. The instruments of Jasenovac were regularly maintained and improved based on operational experience. The camp blacksmiths performed continuous modifications to the original designs, incorporating user suggestions and adapting to different operational situations. This technological evolution of the equipment of death reflected the mentality of continuous improvement applied to genocide. The psychology of the perpetrators revealed through their choice of methods showed a unique combination of personal sadism and ideological justification. Many executioners developed specific preferences for certain instruments or techniques, creating personal killing styles that their colleagues recognized. This personalization of genocide distinguished Jasenovac from other camps where industrialized methods minimized personal contact between perpetrators and victims. The psychological effects of these methods on the perpetrators were documented in later testimonies and medical records. Many executioners developed dependencies on alcohol or drugs to manage the stress of their daily activities. Some developed personal rituals before or after executions that helped them psychologically process their participation in mass murders. The night of August 29, 1942, was engraved in the history of Jasenovac as the moment when systematic barbarism reached its most depraved expression. What began as a casual discussion among Ustaše guards about their respective murder skills was transformed into a formal competition that would turn genocide into entertainment. This night revealed the extent to which the camp culture had normalized and celebrated extreme violence. The camp commander, Luburić, had been drinking with several veteran guards when the debate arose about who could eliminate more victims in a single session. Petar Brzića, an excommunicated Franciscan who had joined the Ustaše, claimed he could beat any previous individual execution record. Ante Zrinušić, known for his efficiency with the Srbosjek, challenged this claim. The alcoholic conversation intensified until it became a formal bet with tangible prizes. Milos decided to organize the competition as a special event that would serve multiple purposes. It would provide entertainment for the guards, who had expressed boredom with the daily routine of executions. It would allow for an objective evaluation of the skills of different executioners for future assignments. More importantly, it would demonstrate to the surviving prisoners the absolute futility of any hope for mercy or escape. The preparation for the contest began during the afternoon of August 29th. Administrators selected approximately 1,100 Serbian prisoners who had arrived in recent transports from the Kozara region, where Ustaše forces had completed a particularly brutal pacification campaign. These prisoners, who included men, women, and children, were concentrated in a specific area of the camp where they could be easily accessible to the competitors. The contest rules were established with bureaucratic precision that contrasted grotesquely with its purpose. Each competitor would have unlimited access to victims during a specific period of time. Executions had to be performed individually using only manual instruments, specifically knives and the Srbosjek. Methods that could artificially accelerate the process were prohibited, such as the use of firearms or mass murder techniques. A panel of judges, composed of veteran guards, would oversee the count and verify that each death met the established standards. Brzica began the competition at approximately 8 in the evening. His technique demonstrated the experience gained during months of daily executions. Using a specially sharpened Srbosjek, he developed a constant rhythm that allowed him to process victims with mechanical efficiency. Surviving witnesses later described his methodology as almost industrial in its consistency, though grotesquely personal in its application. Brzica's specific technique involved organizing victims into rows where each person could observe the fate of those who preceded them. This arrangement maximized psychological terror while optimizing the time between executions. Brzica developed a specific pattern of movements that minimized his physical fatigue while maintaining the precision necessary for consistent lethal cuts. Zrinosic adopted a different approach that prioritized speed over refined technique. His method involved more abrupt and energetic movements that, although technically less elegant, allowed for processing victims more quickly. However, this technique proved more physically exhausting, which eventually limited his stamina during the later hours of the competition. Other participants developed their own methodological variations. Šipoš specialized in strangulation techniques that required less physical energy but more time per victim. Spiro Vukčević combined multiple instruments in specific sequences that demonstrated technical versatility but proved less efficient in terms of total time. The judges maintained meticulous records of each competitor's progress, documenting not only the total number of victims, but also specific technical details. These records included evaluations of the technical quality of the executions, the average time required per victim, and observations on each participant's physical stamina. This bureaucratic documentation of genocide reflected the administrative mentality that characterized the Ustaše regime. The competition extended throughout the night, with periodic interruptions to allow participants to rest and consume alcohol. These breaks became sessions of technical analysis, where competitors shared advice on methodology and discussed refinements to their techniques. Non-participating guards bet on the results and offered commentary as if they were witnessing a sporting event. The atmosphere during the contest combined elements of social celebration with systematic horror. The perpetrators had decorated the area with torches that provided dramatic lighting, while Croatian folk music played from portable gramophones. Alcohol and food circulated freely among the spectators, creating a festive environment that contrasted obscenely with the mass murders that constituted the main entertainment. The reactions of the victims during the contest varied from paralyzed terror to desperate attempts at resistance. Some prisoners attempted escape during moments of confusion, but the area's organization and the abundance of guards made these attempts futile. Other victims tried to offer valuables or information in exchange for mercy, but the competitors had previously agreed to reject any interruption of the competition. The children present during the contest were incorporated as elements of additional challenge for the competitors. The judges assigned special points for executions that demonstrated techniques specifically adapted for young victims. This categorization of victims according to technical criteria exemplified the extent to which the perpetrators had completely dehumanized their activity. The final result of the contest established records that the perpetrators themselves recognized as extraordinary, even by their depraved standards. Brzica reached a total of 1,360 victims during the night, using exclusively his personal Srbosjek. This number significantly surpassed the totals of other competitors and established a record that was never officially beaten at Jasenovac. The methodology used to verify these numbers involved multiple cross-counting systems that guaranteed statistical accuracy. The judges maintained independent counts that were compared at the end of each hour. The bodies were organized into specific groups that facilitated the final count. This bureaucratic precision in the documentation of mass murders reflected the accounting mentality applied to genocide. The prizes awarded to the winners included both material and symbolic elements that revealed the values of the Ustaše system. Brzica received a gold watch, a substantial amount of money, and a specially designed medal identifying him as the most efficient executioner of the camp. These prizes were presented in a formal ceremony that parodied military recognition traditions. The psychological consequences of the contest on the perpetrators were documented in later testimonies. Many participants described the experience as transformative, marking a point of no return in their personal dehumanization. Some developed more severe addictions to alcohol or drugs as coping mechanisms. Others reported recurring nightmares or sleep disorders that persisted for years after the war. News of the contest spread rapidly among the personnel of other Ustaše concentration camps, establishing Jasenovac as the standard of excellence in systematic genocide. Commanders of other camps requested transfers of personnel trained at Jasenovac, while some attempted to organize their own similar competitions, although none reached the scale or notoriety of the original event. The preservation of direct testimonies from Jasenovac presented unique challenges that distinguish this genocide from others documented during World War II. The deliberate policy of witness elimination implemented by the Ustaše authorities meant that less than 1% of those deported to the camp managed to survive. However, the testimonies of these few survivors provided crucial evidence about the internal workings of what many considered to be the most brutal concentration camp in Europe. But Jakov Atijas, a 42-year-old Jewish merchant from Sarajevo, arrived at Jasenovac in September 1942 with a transport that included his wife Rivka and their 3 children. His testimony, meticulously recorded after the war, provided one of the most detailed descriptions of the arrival and selection procedures implemented at the camp. Atijas described how families were separated immediately upon descending from the cattle cars, with men, women, and children directed toward different sections of the camp through a signaling system that had been perfected over months of operation. The process of stripping possessions revealed the bureaucratic efficiency that characterized Jasenovac's operations. Newly arrived prisoners were directed through a series of stations where they systematically lost all elements of their previous identity. At the first station, they had to hand over identity documents, money, and jewelry. The second station required the delivery of luggage and personal objects. The third station involved the complete removal of clothing, which was sorted and stored for later use or sale. Atijas documented the existence of complex hierarchies among the prisoners that reflected both the ethnic divisions of the NDH and the operational needs of the camp. Jewish prisoners with specific technical skills, such as doctors, engineers, or artisans, frequently received slightly better treatment than other prisoners, although this temporary advantage rarely significantly extended their survival. Serbian prisoners constituted the most numerous population and were frequently used for the most dangerous and degrading jobs. Atijas's description of daily life in the barracks revealed conditions specifically calculated to accelerate death by disease and malnutrition. Prisoners received approximately 400 daily calories distributed in 2 meals consisting mainly of watery soup with a few grains and a small piece of black bread. This diet was insufficient to maintain health even without the strenuous physical labor that constituted the mandatory daily routine. Sanitary conditions documented by survivors revealed a deliberate design to promote the spread of infectious diseases. Barracks lacked adequate facilities for personal hygiene, while latrines were intentionally built near potable water sources. Sick prisoners rarely received medical treatment, and those who became too weak to work were selected for immediate elimination. Dusan Jovic, a Serbian schoolteacher who survived 14 months at Jasenovac, extensively documented the forced labor methods used at the camp. Prisoners were organized into specialized brigades that performed different types of work, serving both economic purposes and psychological degradation. Construction brigades continuously expanded the camp's facilities, forcing prisoners to literally build the infrastructure of their own destruction. Brigades specializing in body disposal faced particular psychological traumas that Jovic described in detail. These prisoners were forced to transport the bodies of executed victims from murder sites to crematoriums or mass graves. Frequently, they recognized among the bodies relatives, friends, or members of their own communities, creating traumas that persisted long after any potential liberation. The testimony of Milica Vuksanović, one of the few women who survived Jasenovac, provided unique perspectives on the specific experiences of female prisoners. Women faced particular forms of degradation that combined sexual violence with ethnic and religious humiliation. Pregnant women received specifically brutal treatments that included primitive medical experiments performed without anesthesia or adequate medical knowledge. Children at Jasenovac faced murder methodologies adapted specifically to their age that revealed levels of deprivation that shocked even observers accustomed to extreme violence. Vuksanović described how children were frequently used in macabre games devised by the guards, where survival depended on the ability to entertain their captors. These games invariably ended with the murder of all participants, regardless of their performance. Resistance attempts documented by survivors revealed both the determination of some victims and the futility of organized opposition within the camp. Prisoners developed clandestine communication networks using verbal and gestural codes to share information about imminent selections, changes in guard routines, and potential minor sabotage opportunities. Sabotage practiced by prisoners included subtle methods designed to avoid mass reprisals while causing small interruptions to camp operations. Prisoners assigned to construction work deliberately used defective materials or incorrect techniques that resulted in structures requiring constant repair. Prisoners working in kitchens occasionally contaminated food intended for guards, though the consequences of being discovered made these activities extremely dangerous. Secret communications with the outside, documented by survivors, revealed support networks operating despite the camp's severe security restrictions. Some prisoners assigned to work outside the camp perimeter managed to establish contacts with the local civilian population, who provided limited information about the war and occasionally facilitated the smuggling of small objects or medicines into the camp interior. Selection methods for execution documented by survivors revealed criteria that combined practical considerations with the personal sadism of individual guards. Routine selections systematically eliminated prisoners who became too weak to work effectively. However, selections also reflected the personal whims of specific commanders, who frequently ordered executions based on minor antagonisms or simply to demonstrate their absolute power. Documentation from survivors about the final months of the camp's operation revealed systematic efforts to remove physical evidence of the genocide. Prisoners were forced to exhume bodies from mass common graves for cremation, destroying forensic evidence that could be used in future investigations. This forced removal of physical evidence was accompanied by the systematic murder of prisoners who had been present during the most intensive phases of the extermination operations. Testimonies about escape attempts revealed both the desperation of the prisoners and the effectiveness of the camp's security systems. The few successful escapes required extraordinary combinations of luck, meticulous planning, and external assistance. However, reprisals for failed escape attempts included not only the execution of the captured fugitive, but frequently the elimination of entire groups of prisoners selected arbitrarily as a deterrent example. Accounts of the camp's final moments of operation documented the perpetrators' panic at the prospect of liberation by partisan forces. Commanders implemented an accelerated witness elimination program that included the execution of prisoners who had survived years of internment. Only those prisoners who managed to escape during the final confusion or who hid effectively during the last purges had chances of survival. During the last 8 months of Jasenovac's operation, from October 1944 to April 1945, Ustaše authorities implemented a systematic campaign of evidence elimination that rivaled in organization and meticulousness the extermination operations it sought to hide. The camp commander, aware that Yugoslav partisan forces were steadily advancing toward the area, initiated what was internally known as Operation Cleanup, a euphemism covering the most comprehensive effort of genocidal evidence destruction documented during World War II. The operation began with the systematic destruction of administrative documents that had been meticulously maintained over years of operation. Jasenovac's archives contained detailed records of deportations, inventories of confiscated properties, administrative correspondence, and technical documentation on extermination methods. These documents were classified according to their incriminating potential, with the most compromising evidence removed first through incineration in specially prepared ovens. The documentary destruction revealed the perpetrators' administrative awareness of the criminal nature of their activities. Commanders had maintained duplicates of critical documents in separate locations, anticipating the possibility that primary evidence could be captured. However, during Operation Cleanup, all copies were systematically located and destroyed using methods that guaranteed the complete removal of readable traces. Financial records received particular attention due to their potential to reveal the extent of personal enrichment of commanders and guards through the confiscation of victims' properties. These documents documented specific transactions, including the sale of confiscated valuables, the processing of dental gold extracted from victims, and the distribution of clothing and other personal objects among camp personnel and the local civilian population. The removal of physical evidence presented considerably more complex logistical challenges than the destruction of documents. Camp facilities contained architectural evidence revealing specific adaptations for mass genocide, including modified ovens, drainage systems designed to remove blood, and specialized facilities for body storage. The destruction of these structures required explosives and heavy machinery that had to be obtained without revealing their purpose to the supervising German authorities. Jasenovac's crematoriums were systematically dismantled using techniques that eliminated evidence of their previous use for the cremation of human victims. Ovens were disassembled brick by brick, with reusable materials transported to other sites for civil construction. The refractory bricks that had been in direct contact with human remains were crushed and dispersed, removing potential forensic evidence. Mass common graves presented the most significant challenges for evidence removal, requiring extensive exhumations that exposed perpetrators to additional psychological traumas. Surviving prisoners were forced to manually exhume thousands of bodies in different states of decomposition, separating human remains from personal objects that could facilitate subsequent identification. This forced exhumation constituted an additional form of torture for prisoners who frequently recognized relatives and friends among the remains. Exhumed bodies were processed using methods that maximized the destruction of identifying evidence. Remains were cremated in improvised ovens built specifically for this evidence elimination phase, using high-temperature fuels that guaranteed complete cremation. The resulting ashes were ground to a fine powder consistency, then dispersed in multiple locations to prevent future concentration of forensic evidence. Personal objects recovered during exhumations received specific treatment according to their potential to reveal victim identities or murder methods. Jewelry and valuables were melted or defaced until unrecognizable, while personal documents were incinerated using techniques that guaranteed complete destruction of the paper and ink. Objects of specific religious or cultural value were deliberately desecrated before their destruction, reflecting the goal of eliminating not only physical evidence, but also cultural memory. Evidence elimination included efforts to alter the area's physical landscape to hide signs of mass excavations and other genocide-related activities. Areas where mass graves had existed were refilled using soil imported from other locations, then leveled and replanted with vegetation that would hide signs of previous disturbance. This deliberate landscaping required technical knowledge of agriculture and botany that the perpetrators obtained by consulting with local experts under false pretenses. Efforts to eliminate potential witnesses intensified during the last weeks of the camp's operation, when commanders implemented what they internally termed the final elimination of problematic elements. This phase involved the systematic murder of prisoners who had been present during the most intensive extermination operations and who therefore possessed detailed knowledge about specific methods, grave locations, and perpetrator identities. Guards and administrative personnel who had directly participated in the extermination operations were also identified as potential security risks. Some were reassigned to distant locations within the Ustaše system, while others received forged identity documents that would allow them to disappear into the civilian population once the regime collapsed. Principal commanders developed escape plans toward territory controlled by the Western Allies, anticipating they could negotiate immunity in exchange for information on Yugoslav communist operations. The destruction of specialized tools used for executions required specific methods that would remove evidence of their unique purpose. Srbosjeks and other murder instruments were melted down in local blacksmith workshops, with the resulting metal used to manufacture common agricultural tools. This physical transformation symbolized the effort to normalize elements that had been specifically designed for genocide. The camp's communication systems were systematically dismantled during the final weeks of operation, with telephone and radio equipment destroyed or transported to other Ustaše facilities. Communication records, including transcripts of telephone conversations and copies of messages transmitted by radio, were incinerated using protocols that guaranteed complete destruction of the paper and any readable information. The final liberation of Jasenovac on April 22, 1945, by units of the 1st Proletarian Brigade of the People's Liberation Army of Yugoslavia found facilities that had been systematically emptied and altered to hide their former function. However, evidence removal efforts were incomplete due to time and resource limitations, allowing later researchers to reconstruct significant aspects of the camp's operations. The final days of operation were marked by desperate attempts of some prisoners to escape during the confusion of evacuation. Approximately 600 prisoners attempted a mass escape during the night of April 20th, when Ustaše guards were focused on completing the final destruction of evidence. Of these, fewer than 100 successfully escaped, while the rest were killed during the pursuit or recaptured and immediately executed. Jasenovac's commanders implemented a final protocol involving the elimination of the last surviving witnesses using methods that reflected both panic and determination to hide evidence. Prisoners who had survived years of internment were killed during the camp's final hours of operation, denying them the liberation that was only days away. This final elimination of witnesses demonstrated the extent to which perpetrators understood the criminal nature of their activities and their determination to avoid subsequent legal responsibility. The liberation of Jasenovac in April 1945 marked the beginning of historiographical, political, and legal debates that would persist for decades, becoming central elements of the ethnic tensions that would eventually contribute to the violent disintegration of Yugoslavia. The documentation of the Ustaše genocide faced unique challenges that distinguished its historical memory process from other World War II genocides, creating controversies reflecting both methodological limitations and the political instrumentalization of human tragedy. The first systematic investigation of Jasenovac began immediately after liberation under the supervision of Yugoslav communist authorities, who assigned teams of forensic investigators, historians, and jurists to document the extent of the crimes committed. However, this initial investigation operated under political restrictions that influenced both the methodology employed and the interpretation of the evidence discovered. Josip Broz Tito's Yugoslav government faced complex dilemmas when addressing the Jasenovac legacy that reflected the political realities of post-war Yugoslavia. On one hand, full documentation of Ustaše crimes served political legitimation goals, demonstrating the moral superiority of the multi-ethnic communist system over extreme nationalism. On the other hand, too detailed a documentation of ethnic divisions could fuel tensions the new regime sought to suppress in favor of Yugoslav unity. This political tension significantly influenced the research methodology employed during the 1940s and 50s. Yugoslav researchers prioritized documenting testimonies emphasizing collaboration among different ethnic groups in resisting the Ustaše regime, while minimizing evidence revealing Croatian civilian participation in the genocide. This selective approach created an official narrative that, although fundamentally accurate in terms of basic facts, omitted important aspects of the historical reality. The estimate of the total number of Jasenovac victims became the most controversial aspect of its historical legacy, generating debates that persisted for decades and frequently reflected contemporary political agendas rather than academic rigor. Initial Yugoslav estimates suggested figures of up to 700,000 victims for the entire Ustaše camp system, with Jasenovac responsible for approximately 400,000 deaths. However, subsequent research conducted with more rigorous methodology suggested considerably lower figures, though still massive in absolute scale. Demographic studies conducted during the 80s and 90s using pre-war population records, deportation lists, and survivor testimonies estimated that approximately 83,000 people were killed specifically at Jasenovac, with additional figures for other camps in the Ustaše system. The discrepancy between estimates reflected multiple methodological factors that complicated accurate documentation. The systematic destruction of administrative records during Operation Cleanup removed primary sources that would have provided precise data on deportations and executions. The overlap between victims of different camps in the Ustaše system complicated the specific attribution of deaths to Jasenovac versus other facilities. More significantly, the nature of the elimination methods employed at Jasenovac presented unique forensic challenges. Extensive cremation of remains, ash dispersal, and the disposal of bodies in the Sava River severely limited the availability of direct physical evidence. Researchers were forced to rely primarily on survivor and perpetrator testimonies, sources that, although valuable, presented inherent limitations of memory, trauma, and personal motivations. The political instrumentalization of victim figures intensified during the decades preceding Yugoslavia's collapse, when nationalists from different ethnic groups used specific estimates to support contemporary political narratives. Serbian nationalists frequently cited the highest estimates as evidence of systematic genocide against their population, justifying defensive policies in federal Yugoslavia. Croatian nationalists argued that the high estimates were communist exaggerations designed to unfairly demonize the Croatian people. The construction of the Jasenovac Memorial during the 60s reflected these political and methodological dilemmas. The memorial's design, completed in 1966, adopted an abstract symbolism, avoiding specific references to victims' ethnic identities, emphasizing instead universal themes of resistance against fascism. This approach reflected the official Yugoslav ideology of brotherhood and unity, but also contributed to the abstraction of the specific historical experience. International academic debates on Jasenovac intensified during the 80s, when Western historians began systematically examining the Ustaše genocide using methodology developed for Nazi Holocaust studies. These studies revealed unique aspects of the Yugoslav genocide, distinguishing it from other documented cases, including the role of religious motivations, the participation of Catholic clergy, and the artisanal nature of murder methods. However, the application of methodology developed for the German context revealed limitations when applied to the Yugoslav case. German industrialized documentation methods had no equivalent in the more artisanal Ustaše system, while analytical categories developed to understand Nazi anti-Semitism proved inadequate for understanding the ethnic and religious dimensions of genocide in the Balkans. The emergence of denial specifically related to Jasenovac during the 80s and 90s reflected both contemporary political dynamics and the methodological vulnerabilities of historical research on the camp. Deniers exploited discrepancies in victim estimates to question the basic reality of the genocide, using techniques developed by Holocaust deniers but adapted to the specific Yugoslav context. The collapse of Yugoslavia during the 90s fundamentally transformed the political and academic context within which Jasenovac was studied. The new independent states developed national narratives frequently minimizing or exaggerating specific aspects of the genocide according to their utility for contemporary political legitimation. Independent Croatia faced particular pressures to address the Ustaše legacy while building a modern national identity. Croatian efforts to historically contextualize the Ustaše regime generated additional controversy when some academics and politicians attempted to equate Ustaše crimes with crimes committed by Yugoslav communist forces after the war. This relativization was criticized by historians as an attempt to minimize the uniqueness and scale of the Ustaše genocide, although it reflected genuine complexities regarding collective and individual responsibility. Modern archaeological research at the Jasenovac site, initiated during the 2000s, provided new physical evidence helping resolve some long-standing controversies over camp operation. Excavations revealed previously unknown structures, human remains, and objects confirming specific aspects of survivor testimonies that had been questioned by deniers. However, even this archaeological evidence faced controversial interpretations when different groups used findings to support divergent estimates on the number of victims. The fragmentary nature of the physical evidence, a result of destruction efforts implemented during Operation Cleanup limited the precision of quantitative conclusions based solely on archaeological evidence. Contemporary debates over Jasenovac reflect broader tensions regarding historical memory, collective responsibility, and reconciliation in post-conflict societies. The Yugoslav experience demonstrated how traumatic historical events can be simultaneously remembered and distorted according to the political needs of different historical moments, complicating efforts to establish definitive historical narratives. The legacy of Jasenovac continues to influence intergroup relations in the contemporary Balkans, where different communities maintain divergent memories of World War II events. These differences in historical memory contributed to the tensions fueling the Yugoslav conflicts of the 90s, demonstrating how unresolved historical traumas can perpetuate across generations.